Most people spend their lives trying to change their circumstances, not realizing they're rebuilding the wrong thing. They chase better jobs, better relationships, better opportunities, convinced that if something out there improves, everything inside will fall into place. But time has a way of proving a hard truth. New surroundings don't fix old thinking, and new opportunities don't help an unprepared mind. At some point, everyone reaches a quiet moment of frustration. You're working hard, yet progress feels slow. You're busy, yet unfulfilled. You've tried motivation, advice, maybe even reinvention, but somehow you keep arriving at the same results wearing different labels. That moment isn't failure, it's a signal. A signal that the problem isn't effort and it isn't luck. It's alignment. Life doesn't respond to what you want, it responds to who you are. The world rarely changes to meet your expectations, but it always adjusts to your level of discipline, thinking, and self-respect. If you want more income, more confidence, more freedom, the question isn't what you should chase next, it's what you need to become. Today isn't about starting over, it's about starting deeper. Not fixing the outside, but rebuilding the foundation. Because when the foundation changes, everything built on it must change too. Personal responsibility is the point where real transformation begins. Until a person accepts full ownership of their life, progress remains accidental and fragile. Blaming circumstances, people, timing, or luck may feel comforting, but it quietly robs you of power. The moment responsibility is outsourced, control is surrendered. When you take responsibility, you reclaim authority over your direction, your decisions, and your future. Taking responsibility does not mean denying hardship or pretending the road was fair. It means recognizing that regardless of how things started, what happens next is yours to decide. Life is not always a result of what happens to you, but it is always a result of how you respond. Two individuals can face the same setback. One uses it as justification to quit. The other uses it as fuel to grow. The difference is not intelligence or opportunity, but ownership. Personal responsibility forces honesty. It removes the comforting lies and replaces them with productive truth. When you accept that your habits created your current results, you also accept that new habits can create new results. This realization is uncomfortable, but it is empowering. If you cause the problem, you can also build the solution. Responsibility shifts your focus from complaint to correction. Growth begins when excuses end. Every excuse delays improvement by convincing you that change is someone else's job. Responsibility, on the other hand, demands action. It asks what you could do better, not who failed you. It pushes you to develop skills instead of resentment, discipline instead of frustration, patience instead of bitterness. Over time, these internal upgrades reshape external outcomes. Responsibility also builds resilience. When challenges appear, a responsible person looks inward for strength rather than outward for sympathy. This mindset creates stability in unstable conditions. You stop waiting for motivation and start relying on commitment. You stop negotiating with weakness and start aligning with standards. Life becomes less about reacting and more about directing. Most importantly, personal responsibility restores self-respect. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing your progress depends on your effort. You begin to trust yourself because you keep promises to yourself. Small wins accumulate, not because life became easier, but because you became stronger. The foundation of rebuilding yourself is accepting that no one is coming to save you, but you are fully capable of saving yourself through consistent, responsible action. Your philosophy is the quiet force guiding every decision you make, whether you are aware of it or not. It is the collection of beliefs, attitudes, and interpretations you carry about work, failure, success, effort, and time. Over years, this internal framework shapes the direction of your life more powerfully than talent, intelligence, or opportunity. People rarely drift into remarkable lives. They live out what they consistently believe. Every action is first a thought. What you believe about discipline determines whether you follow through or quit early. What you believe about failure determines whether you learn or withdraw. When your philosophy is weak, progress feels heavy and inconsistent. When it is strong, even difficult actions feel purposeful. Life does not respond to wishes, it responds to beliefs translated into behavior. Philosophy is built gradually through repeated experiences and accepted ideas. If you repeatedly tell yourself that effort does not matter, you will avoid responsibility. If you believe time is abundant, urgency disappears. If you believe success belongs to others, your actions will always reflect hesitation. These beliefs do not shout, they whisper, guiding choices in moments that seem insignificant but eventually define outcomes. Small philosophies produce small lives. A belief like I'll try when I feel ready delays growth indefinitely. A belief like I do what needs to be done whether I feel like it or not creates momentum. The difference between these ideas may seem minor but lived daily. They lead to dramatically different futures. What you accept as normal becomes your standard, and standards quietly determine results. Changing your future requires upgrading your philosophy. This does not mean adopting motivational slogans, but questioning the assumptions you live by. What do you think the way you do about effort, risk, or learning? Who taught you these beliefs, and are they still serving you? When you adjust your philosophy, behavior follows naturally. Discipline improves not because of pressure, but because your internal logic has changed. A refined philosophy brings clarity. It simplifies decisions and strengthens resolve. You no longer debate whether growth is worth the effort because your beliefs have already answered the question. Over time, your philosophy becomes visible in your results, your relationships, and your reliability. Life aligns with the way you think, and as your thinking rises, so does the quality of your future. Real change begins internally, long before anything visible shifts on the outside. Circumstances are often blamed for stagnation, but they are rarely the true cause. Two people can share the same environment, resources, and challenges, yet experience entirely different outcomes. The deciding factor is not what surrounds them, but what is being developed within them. When you attempt to fix life solely by changing conditions, progress remains temporary and dependent. When you strengthen the inner structure, improvement becomes stable and self-sustaining. An inside-out approach recognizes that habits, character, and thinking patterns are the engines behind every result. External success without internal growth creates imbalance. Money without discipline disappears. Opportunity without preparation creates stress. Recognition without humility leads to collapse. When inner development is neglected, outer gains eventually expose weaknesses. True rebuilding requires reinforcing the internal framework so it can support greater responsibility and reward. Inner work begins with awareness. Observing how you think under pressure, how you respond to failure, and how you speak to yourself reveals the roots of your behavior. Many limitations are not imposed by life, but maintained by unchecked thoughts and emotional reactions. When these internal patterns remain unchanged, new opportunities are handled with old habits, producing familiar results. Growth demands intentional reflection and the willingness to confront personal inconsistencies. Discipline is an internal skill before it is an external action. Motivation fluctuates, but character determines consistency. Developing self-control, patience, and focus allows progress even when conditions are unfavorable. These traits are not inherited. They are built through repeated choices that align with long-term values rather than short-term comfort. Each disciplined decision strengthens the internal structure, making future discipline easier. Rebuilding from within also requires emotional resilience. Life inevitably presents setbacks, criticism, and uncertainty. Without inner strength, these experiences become discouraging. With it, they become refining. Resilient individuals do not avoid difficulty. They interpret it differently. They view challenges as training rather than punishment, which preserves momentum and self-belief. When inner growth leads, external change follows naturally. Improved thinking sharpens decisions. Stronger character attracts trust. Clearer values simplify priorities. Over time, life reflects what has been cultivated internally. Circumstances shift, not because they were chased, but because the person facing them has evolved. The most reliable way to rebuild a life is to rebuild the person living it. Progress is rarely the result of dramatic moments or sudden bursts of effort. It is shaped by what is done repeatedly, especially when no one is watching and no immediate reward is present. Intensity feels powerful because it creates emotion, but emotion fades. Consistency, on the other hand, works quietly and steadily, producing results that last. A single day of extreme effort may inspire, but it does not transform. Transformation comes from ordinary actions performed without interruption. Intense effort often relies on motivation, and motivation is unreliable. It rises when conditions are favorable and disappears when discomfort appears. Consistent effort relies on commitment, which remains steady regardless of mood. When actions are tied to discipline instead of feeling, progress continues even on difficult days. This removes the stop and start cycle that keeps many people trapped in frustration. Small actions repeated daily compound in ways that are easy to underestimate. A few minutes of focused learning each day builds knowledge over time. A simple health habit practiced consistently improves energy and confidence. Minor financial discipline applied regularly creates stability. Each individual action may seem insignificant, but together they create momentum. Momentum turns effort into identity, and identity sustains behavior. Intensity often leads to burnout because it demands too much too quickly. People push hard, exhaust themselves, then retreat, convincing themselves that the effort was the problem rather than the approach. Consistency respects human limits. It allows growth without overwhelm, making improvement sustainable. When progress is sustainable, it becomes dependable. Consistency also builds trust with oneself. Every time you follow through on a small commitment, you reinforce self-belief. This internal trust becomes a powerful driver of future action. When promises are kept regularly, confidence grows naturally. Intensity may impress others, but consistency strengthens character. Another advantage of consistency is adaptability. Repeated action allows reflection and adjustment. You learn what works, what doesn't, and how to improve. Intense all-or-nothing efforts leave little room for learning because failure feels catastrophic. Consistent effort treats mistakes as part of the process rather than a reason to quit. Over time, consistency reshapes standards. What once required effort becomes routine. Discipline becomes normal rather than forced. Progress becomes expected rather than hoped for. This quiet persistence outperforms enthusiasm because it does not depend on excitement. It depends on choice repeated daily, shaping results that intensity alone can never sustain. Growth always asks for a price, and that price is discomfort. Staying the same feels safe because it is familiar even when it is limiting. The mind naturally resists change, not because change is harmful, but because uncertainty threatens comfort. Rebuilding yourself requires stepping beyond what feels normal, which creates tension between who you are and who you are trying to become. That tension is not a sign of failure, it is evidence of progress. Discomfort appears the moment you challenge old patterns. When you attempt to wake earlier, speak with more honesty, set boundaries, or demand more from yourself, resistance arises. The body and mind prefer efficiency, and old habits are efficient because they are practiced. New behaviors feel awkward and draining at first, not because they are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar. Avoiding this discomfort guarantees stagnation. Letting go is often harder than starting. Old routines, identities, and beliefs provide a sense of certainty. Even unhealthy patterns can feel reassuring because they are predictable. Rebuilding requires releasing these attachments, which can feel like loss. You may outgrow environments, conversations, and versions of yourself that once felt essential. This emotional discomfort is part of the transition, not a mistake in the process. Discomfort also tests commitment. Anyone can pursue growth when it feels exciting. The real test comes when progress feels slow, lonely, or unrewarded. In these moments, discomfort reveals whether the desire for change is surface level or deeply rooted. Those who continue despite discomfort develop strength that cannot be taught through comfort alone. Avoiding discomfort creates a hidden cost. What is avoided today becomes heavier tomorrow. Ignored weaknesses harden into limitations. Postponed decisions accumulate into regret. Discomfort experienced early prevents suffering later. Choosing temporary unease in the present protects long-term peace and freedom. Learning to interpret discomfort correctly changes its impact. Instead of seeing it as a signal to stop, it becomes a signal to adapt. Physical strain builds strength, mental strain builds clarity, and emotional strain builds resilience. Each form of discomfort stretches capacity. Without stretch, there is no expansion. Over time, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. What once felt difficult becomes routine. The discomfort does not disappear because life becomes easier, but because capability increases. Growth reshapes tolerance. Achievement often receives the spotlight, but it is only a reflection of something deeper. What you accomplish is temporary. Who you become is lasting. Goals are reached and then replaced. Milestones are crossed and then forgotten, but character continues to shape every stage that follows. When focus is placed only on outcomes, life becomes a chase. When focus is placed on personal growth, outcomes become a byproduct. Becoming a better version of yourself influences every area of life simultaneously. Improved discipline affects health, work, and relationships. Stronger integrity builds trust wherever you go. Clearer thinking improves decision-making across situations. Achievements are usually confined to a single area, but growth in character multiplies benefits everywhere. A person who becomes reliable, patient, and skilled carries those qualities into every pursuit. Achievements without growth often create pressure. When success arrives before inner development, it exposes weaknesses rather than rewarding effort. Responsibility feels heavy, expectations feel overwhelming, and fear of loss replaces enjoyment. Growth prepares you to handle what you desire. It builds the emotional and mental capacity required to sustain progress without collapse. When you become stronger internally, success feels natural instead of fragile. Focusing on becoming rather than achieving also changes motivation. External rewards fluctuate, but internal standards remain stable. You are no longer driven only by applause, recognition, or comparison. You are guided by values and self-respect. This creates consistency even when results are slow. Effort becomes meaningful because it aligns with identity, not just ambition. Who you become determines what you attract. Opportunities tend to follow capability. Trust follows reliability. Influence follows character. When growth is prioritized, life responds with expanded possibilities. You no longer need to chase validation because your presence carries confidence earned through effort. This quiet strength is noticeable and persuasive without being loud. Personal growth also builds resilience. Achievements can be taken away by circumstances, markets, or timing. Skills, discipline, and wisdom cannot be removed. They travel with you into every new situation. When setbacks occur, a developed person adapts faster because the foundation remains intact. Loss becomes temporary because ability remains permanent. When attention stays on becoming better, progress feels grounded. You measure success by improvement rather than comparison. Each day becomes an opportunity to refine habits, sharpen thinking, and strengthen character. Over time, achievements arrive not because they were pursued obsessively, but because the person pursuing them evolved. The greatest return on effort comes from investing in who you are becoming, because that investment never stops paying dividends. Rebuilding yourself is not a one-time decision. It is a lifelong commitment to growth, discipline, and self-awareness. Every step you take toward improving your mindset, strengthening your habits, and raising your standards shapes the direction of your future. The world around you may change slowly, but the moment you begin to change from within, you set powerful forces in motion. Progress does not come from wishing for better circumstances. It comes from becoming a better, stronger, wiser version of yourself. There will be days when growth feels difficult and progress seems invisible. During those moments, remember that rebuilding is happening beneath the surface. Every discipline choice, every lesson learned from failure, and every effort made when it would have been easier to quit is laying bricks for a stronger foundation. Over time, those small efforts build a life that reflects confidence, purpose, and resilience. As you move forward, trust the process of improving yourself step by step. Believe in your ability to grow beyond your limitations and shape a future that reflects your highest potential. I wish you strength in your challenges, courage in your decisions, and consistency in your journey toward becoming the best version of yourself. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to grow.